Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers. And even if we did have only Christians in our midst, if we expelled every non-Christian from the United States of America, whose Christianity would we teach in the schools? Would it be James Dobson's or Al Sharpton's? Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay, and that eating shellfish is an abomination? Or we could go with Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application? So before we get carried away, let's read our Bibles now. Folks haven't been reading the Bible.
2 Peter 3:3 says, "In the last days scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires." Welcome back to another edition of the Prepper Recon Podcast. I've been purchasing gold and silver from JM Bullion since before they were a show sponsor because they have the lowest price of any dealer I know of. JM Bullion now offers free shipping on all orders. Check them out online today at jmbullion.com. Our individual first aid kits are now on sale. They're MOLLE-compatible pouches in Coyote, ACU, OD, or Black. They're equipped with an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, TK4 tourniquet, suture kit, and lots of extras. It's perfect for your car, bug-out bag, or home first aid kit. Go to the PrepperRecon.com homepage and click on the IFAC store tab at the top of the page. They're on sale for $89, and that includes shipping. This kit could save your life. Today's guest is Don Casey. Don is going to fill us in on some little-known facts about Agenda 21. Don, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, you're quite welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you on here. Now, for the folks who may be hearing about Agenda 21 for the first time, can you give us a brief overview of what that is?
Well, Agenda 21 is the agenda for the 21st century. I didn't name it. It's what the 178 countries came together and agreed to back in 1992. It is one of many comprehensive plans dealing at the global level in the implementation for something called sustainable development. And George Bush, the 41st President of the United States, signed this agreement for us in 1992. Make the point, it is a voluntary plan of action. But what better way to implement something when you voluntarily agree to adopt it? I mean, there's no gun to our head, and we're spending money, and have been since 1992, to implement this policy at every level. As a matter of fact, the Association of County Commissioners, when she testified before the Senate Committee on the Livable Sustainable Communities Act back in 2010, and by the way, she was the Carroll County Commissioner, that's Carroll County, Maryland, so she was both a commissioner and a spokesperson for the National Association of Counties. And she went through the entire 20-year history of that association's implementation of something called sustainable development. In the 2012 anniversary, 20th anniversary of the adoption of this philosophy, if you will, it's really a religion, Hillary Clinton said that we're going to bring in local governments, state governments, we're going to bring in civic organizations, churches, government, all in an effort to implement this philosophy called sustainable development. So this has been going on since 1969, when the United States codified this or adopted this through the National Environmental Policy Act. So this is has a long history. It's not just at the global level. I think most people would like to watch what's going on, observe the national and global level, but they never think about that local mayor that adopts the climate change treaty and begins to implement regulations designed to prevent you from producing carbon emissions beyond that which is allowable under this new plan of action.
And what's the most concerning element of Agenda 21, and why should we be paying attention to it?
Well, the most concerning thing is the local environmental, let me back up. Local code enforcement that adopts the three legs of implementation, which will be social, economic, and environmental, seeks to make everything equal between the current species of human beings that's here today. In other words, we at the local level will have a redistribution of taxation so that the side of town that has had a silver spoon in its mouth for many generations now has a heavier tax burden in order to equally distribute that income throughout the community. Now, that's intergenerational equity, and intragenerational equity means we have to look forward in time and restrict the exploitation. Now, that's their words, not mine, because we don't use private property to our benefit. We exploit the resources that Mother Earth has provided for us, and we have to limit what we extract or exploit from Mother Earth in order to ensure that future generations have the very same access to that gallon of gasoline that we may burn just to go on a Sunday afternoon ride. Now, there is something else called species equity, and believe me, it's been in codification in the legal industry for a long time, because if you've ever heard of the Endangered Species Act, that's exactly what this is. We are elevating the rights of other species above that of man. It is a usurpation of God's throne, because God gave man dominion over the earth, and here is a council on environmental quality. Go to the White House website and look across the tabs, go all the way to the right, and you'll find this Council on Environmental Quality, and they have the responsibility to determine the manner in which other species will be given more accredited rights than we have, according to the government. So that's essentially the philosophy. And we don't have to call it Agenda 21. We don't have to call it sustainable development. All we have to do is write it into our comprehensive plan, and because we're ignorant of what's occurring, we will likely, as far as I can tell across the board, adopt this philosophy without any problem.
Wow, that's pretty scary. Now, how does Agenda 21 affect private property? Does it affect the ownership of my home?
Well, there is right now a controversy that's making national news where a man painted the front of his house the color of an American flag. Have you seen that?
I'm not familiar with that one, but I've seen other things where similar to that.
There's a man in Florida that was visited by code enforcement, required to do certain things to his private property, and because we don't understand the difference between private, personal, and real estate, we think that the jurisdiction of local government has authority over us on our private property, and as such, in our ignorance, we are embroiled in a legal controversy, and this man, in protest, has painted the front of his house so that it looks like an American flag, and he's going to paint other sides of the house. Well, now, this was a requirement. What happened was the code enforcement officer came and said, you have chip paint on your house, and you're going to have to paint it. So in protest, he painted this flag. Now, that's just one aspect of it, because then when you figure in, if you have a maid in your house, is she being paid a living wage? Does she get health care? Is she being treated equitably under sustainable development? All of these things have to be measured in order to ensure that you are the appropriate individual to live and reside within a sustainable community.
So it sounds like besides just the ecological agenda behind Agenda 21, it sounds like it's a very communist, or at the very least socialist agenda, besides just what most of us think of as being the ecological side of that.
Well, sure it is, and it has a religious foundation in the worship of Mother Earth. For instance, the Ark of the Covenant was copied, and it's called the Ark of Hope, made exactly like the Ark of Covenant, made out of a tree in Germany, shipped over to the meditation room at the United Nations, where it resided for 6 months, and it had the Earth Charter. Now, there is a movement to make every constitution across this globe adopt the tenets of the Earth Charter. And the Earth Charter would, for instance, one of the things is that your local community would have a spokesperson or an ombudsman who would speak for the rights of Mother Earth, and when you're accused of it, you would have to come and prove that you're not degrading Mother Earth or exploiting her resources beyond that which she could sustain. So this Earth Charter, Gorbachev said that it's a Sermon on the Mount for future generations and how they should interact with Mother Earth. So you kind of get an idea that this is not just a political philosophy, but a religious philosophy, and anything that does not conform itself to that would, of course, be an outlawed religion, because it's supporting the principles that cannot make a community sustainable.
So do you think that Agenda 21 has any significance in regard to end times prophecy?
Oh, but sure it does. Well, I'm not a Bible scholar, but if you can't see the handwriting on the wall, you're not watching.
And then would you say Agenda 21 played any part in the recent land battle between Cliven Bundy and the Bureau of Land Management?
Well, that goes right back to the founding of the country. And most people don't realize that when the states entered the Union, for instance, I'll take Alabama because I'm more familiar with the state. Back in 1819, they entered the Union, and there was an agreement made that all of the rights to private property would be transferred to the United States. And the United States would then come and set up land patent offices, and they would issue what's called a land patent, where all rights, privileges, immunities, and appurtenances of whatsoever nature were granted or acknowledged to be owned by, in my case, Mr. Brown in 1858. He received a land patent that was actually signed by the President of the United States. Most of these land patents were, all the way up until the 1900s, were signed by the President. It carries the same weight as a treaty. So all of the rights now were applicable to Mr. Brown, and the state east of the Mississippi really didn't have very much problems associated with this. But by the time the states west of the Mississippi came into the Union, the federal government more or less just didn't issue the land patent, or for whatever reason, the property was not purchased, because there was some land in Alabama that was not fit for agriculture and did not make a sale, or were not claimed by, for instance, military people or people that had served the military. So that land, when it was not sold, went back to the state of Alabama. Well, in the case of the western states, the land never was transferred back to the state governments. And of course, back in the early 1800s, the land was arid. It was not good for agriculture. There were many minerals on there. And as time went by, the federal government began to understand the importance of the mineral rights, and they just kept the land. They didn't transfer it back to Nevada. And so that's essentially what Clyde Bundy is complaining about. And it's unfortunate that he has not been able to articulate well his position. And I think that's been to the detriment of people that know about land patents and contractual law. So in that instance, if we had a governor of Nevada, or any governor of that, for that matter, of any state, that would stand up and with some backbone say to the federal government, you are our agent, we created you, and there is a strict jurisdictional line between you and the state governments, and you have transgressed that, then you'd see a big change in what federal government's doing.
I think the federal government's transgressed quite a few lines, haven't they?
Oh, they sure have. As a matter of fact, Justice Roberts in the Obamacare ruling chided the governors. He said the governors are not doing what they're supposed to do. They are the principal. We, the federal government, are the agents, and until they stand up and speak, we will exercise complete and absolute authority in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 and 18, and he quoted part of that. And part of that, or essentially what he said was, we have absolute authority within the United States. Now, there's 3 United States. There is the United States that sits as a national government in comparison to all the other governments. Then there is the Union of States, 50 states. And then there is the United States that has authority over the territories, and that comes under the third organic law, which is the Northwest Ordinance, which is still applicable. It is one of the 4 organic laws codified, and that has control over, or gives the federal government control over the territories that were not at the time adopted as statehood, and, for instance, Guam, Puerto Rico right now, and the military bases. So the federal government does have absolute legislative authority over those areas. And because the governors are not saying that's where you have implemented Obamacare, it is not applicable to the state governments, and you cannot draw us into it because of that jurisdictional line. We have no one to educate the general populace because we don't have a governor with any backbone.
And why do you think we don't have any governors with any backbone? Is it because are they a reflection of a complacent citizenry, and we just treat our elections like a glorified American Idol contest?
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. And first, at the top of the list, I think would be what we commonly refer to as grants, which is debt notes from the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank, issued off as a debt instrument. And so the federal government comes in and offers this money to the states, and the governors take it. When they do, they're on the dole. They would have to stand up against all the people that want that supposed free money. That's the first thing. The other thing is that most people don't realize that there are actually 3 United States, and there are legal definitions. In other words, there's case law, judicial rulings that speak of this quite plainly. And because of that, people don't know, and it would take almost an act of Congress to have it taught in schools so that we have a generation that graduates with this general foundational knowledge that's required for maintaining our republic, because we're giving up that birthright, and we're not even getting to smell the bowl of soup as Esau did. We're just giving it up just as fast as we can.
And then you mentioned it's not being taught in schools. Is that an act of neglect, or is that malicious intent that it's not taught in schools?
Well, in the beginning, and I would say the beginning had to be sometime in the early 1900s. I take that back. I was making a presentation in Chattanooga maybe 2 years ago, and there was a man that came up and spoke to me afterwards, after I had talked about the 3 jurisdictions, or that's correct, 3 jurisdictions of the United States. And he said, I graduated from school in the 1950s and in Massachusetts, and they taught me that, and I had forgotten it. So at least in the 1950s, this knowledge was being taught, but now it's not taught, and this generation is getting older. I'm essentially of that same generation. And when we die off, unless we're able to teach the remnant that is here and left, there will be no knowledge unless you begin to look at the documents that were printed back then and the various case rulings, judicial rulings that affirm that.
What does Agenda 21 mean for U.S. sovereignty? Are we ceding power as a country to the UN?
Well, let me say that our ceding of sovereignty dates back to 1945, when we entered into an agreement with the United Nations, and we said that the Security Council has the responsibility for global peace. So if you go back and check, you will find that after the Twin Towers were fell fell by the airplanes crashing into them, Colin Powell went to the Security Council and obtained a permit, if you will, and backdated it so that our actions on the day prior were legal under this new system. And we have been acting under the Security Council's resolution ever since. So in that sense, we no longer have the authority. Of course, the United Nations Charter recognizes the ability for reaction in real time, but you still have to go back and obtain the authorization from the United Nations, and that's exactly what Colin Powell did. So we, and the, I think it was, as a matter of fact, I know it was, Kennedy, in his administration, acknowledged that we would have a global army as we scale back over time, and we've been doing that ever since, scaling back and submitting our forces to joint membership with others, and all of the regional military alliances, for instance, NATO, is set up under the United Nations Charter. So all of these military alliances that exist across the globe are sanctioned by the United Nations. So we, step by step, over a long period of time, have been ceding more and more sovereignty to this entity called the United Nations. And I don't know if you recall, but Michael New was a young man enlisted in the military, I think this was back in the 90s, and he refused to wear the blue helmet, refused to put the patch on his arm, and go under a command from, I think it was a Belgian military officer that was going to take charge of his unit. And he was given a general discharge because he would not obey the orders of a foreign officer, which is all unconstitutional. So, and this never really got to in any public way of making waves and becoming known to the general public, and it's just unfortunate because that's just another step of putting on the blue helmets for every race across the globe and adopting this agenda of globalization.
And he was in a branch of the U.S. military?
Yeah, he sure was.
And I don't think the recruiting officers are telling the young men and women about that when they sign up, are they?
And that's right, because as a matter of fact, when I went in the Navy, I took the oath, just as everybody else did, to protect the United States from enemies, both domestic and foreign. Well, here was a situation where he was still in the military, but he was going to take orders from a foreign officer. Well, if that foreign officer had given him an order to do something inside the continental United States that obviously was not authorized by the Constitution, would he have then been in violation of the orders given to him, or would he have been found to uphold the Constitution and allowed to disobey those orders? And that was some of the controversy that was raised by Michael New, and of course the military did not accept what he had to say and drummed him out of the service.
And our men and women that are serving in the service now, they've been told that they're not, if they're Christians anyway, they're not allowed to proselytize. They're not allowed to share their faith in Christ with other members of the military. Which, to me, I think that, you know, if you're going on a battlefield, you probably need Jesus more than ever. But I guess essentially, if you're a Christian in the military, the policy is don't ask, don't tell. Is that right?
Well, the whole problem is that our ignorance abounds. Because if you go and look at the first codified document in our legal system, which is the Declaration of Independence, and you go to the first code book for the federal government, they're called the 4 Organic Laws. And that first organic law is written a little over a year after the actions of the people of April the 19th of 1775. And those people said, there is no king but King Jesus. And it was not until the codification of their action on July 4th of 1776 that the Creator was recognized as the one that endowed each and every individual with unalienable rights. And I hyphenate that specifically because those rights that have been granted to us by the Creator cannot be given away at all. As a matter of fact, Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he specifically used the word unalienable. He also wrote the Declaration of Human Rights. And if you begin to think about, for France, that is, you begin to think about the difference between the two. You see, France had already declared that there was no God, so he couldn't say that the Creator had granted rights. We, in our system, acknowledge the Creator as the first and primary jurisdiction, having granted those things to each and every one of us that we cannot give away. Therefore, our rights are unalienable. In other words, any entity created by man or man himself cannot place a lien against that which the Creator has granted to us. Now, if you begin to look at the various preambles for all of the constitutions for state governments, you will find, for instance, Alabama's citizens declare that we are invoking the guidance of Almighty God. So in that instance, our judicial system lays the foundation on the Creator, and we don't have governors nor anyone in the federal government acknowledging that fact and calling to task these people that are saying that you cannot acknowledge the Creator, Jesus Christ, as they did April the 19th of 1775 and codified it in 1776.
It's really a shame that we've fallen so far from that rich heritage that we had at one point. Now, the UN recently pushed for taxing authority on certain types of offshore mineral exploration and exploitation. Does that sound like they're pressing for more global power?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, and they'll have it on the internet. As soon as they get power to tax, they'll have the power to regulate it. They want regulations on. As a matter of fact, there's called the Treaty Law of the Sea. I can't think of the. It's an acronym, and it is a treaty where all of the resources that are on the surface of the oceans would be only allowable to mine or drill or whatever unless you paid a tax to the United Nations and they oversaw what could be extracted from Mother Earth.
And then what can we, the people, do to push back against Agenda 21? Do we have to get involved at the local level?
Yes, and I make this point. Everybody wants to get upset about what's going on in Washington. And honest to goodness, my opinion, over a long period of time, you're not going to affect any change in Washington. You get a hold to your local mayor, your local county commissioner. You look at what has already been adopted in the comprehensive plans. Look for the tenets of sustainable development. And frequently now you'll find that it's not just written, the tenets are not just written, but it's acknowledged. For instance, in this Birmingham Comprehensive Plan, they have acknowledged the sustainable development and the very definition of sustainable development, which was coined by the Glow-Harlem-Brundtland Report, which was commissioned by the United Nations, and that was published in 1987. So the laws put on the book in 1969 and 1970 by the federal government, which incorporated the tenets of sustainable development, did not get its name until 1987. You move forward to today's date. Here, Birmingham, Alabama has already adopted a 1,200-page comprehensive plan that includes the quality of life police. And these police will look at you as an individual based on 3 criteria, social, economic, and environmental, and determine whether you're going to get credits or demerits for this new system that's being put in place.
And go ahead.
Let me go one step further.
Sure
you
thing.
can pull nose to nose with your mayor. And if he refuses to acknowledge the very language that's written into the comprehensive plan, you can talk to him about it in a very real fashion and affect the outcome. At the national level, it's just not going to be something that's tenable. And in order for the remnant to be educated, we have to start with those around us that we can talk to.
And what will private land use look like in 10 years if we do nothing?
Well, in the rural sections, you're going to have a set aside of 50% of your lot for, well, let me back up. I'll tell you what's going on in Maryland. I just talked to some people after making a presentation on Agenda 21. Some people that have moved to Alabama because of what's going on in Maryland said, first, they are taxing you on impervious surface. In other words, if you own a 50 by 50 lot and you put up a building that's 50 by 50, then you have a roof that covers the entire surface of your lot. It is impervious. In other words, water cannot go through that roof and percolate into the ground and water and refresh Mother Earth, so to speak. So you're taxed more in Maryland because you have too much impervious surface. And if you'll get on the internet and look it up, you'll find that pervious pavement is now being put in place because your driveway, if you have a long driveway, it would be an impervious surface. So you would be taxed accordingly. If you come in and rip it up and put something in that allows the water to go in, it would lessen your tax burden. Now, Maryland now is contemplating a tax on the size of your dog. So these kinds of things are just beginning to get a foothold, and there are very few people that are going to connect all of this to something called Agenda 21 or Sustainable Development. But in fact, that's where this philosophy is coming from.
Wow, so there's a lot of stuff that we need to start paying attention to and waking up and researching and start getting into the local governments and getting involved in politics, because if we sit back and do nothing, we're not going to have anything at all. So, Don, thanks so much for all of the great education you've given us today. You've given us a lot of good stuff to think about and to continue researching. So, thanks again for coming on the show.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Anytime.
American Reset, the long-awaited conclusion of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, is now available. In Book 3, the ultimate contest between liberty and tyranny reaches the apex. The Bear family and their neighbors fight to survive the fallout of the meltdown and cling to the principles in the Constitution. Will the collapse bring an oppressive regime that enslaves the American people, or will the patriots prevail and guide the country back to freedom, peace, and prosperity? Get your copy in Kindle, audio, or paperback on Amazon today.